All right, step 2, practicing with a plan. So we've discussed some of the basics of practicing with a plan already, how the goal is to know what specifically you're working on and working to correct or improve with each repetition. But now I want to dive in a little bit further to this concept, introducing you to some of the terms that you'll hear me use regularly throughout the rest of this course. We'll also discuss the idea of cultivating awareness, which is mostly my fancy term for paying very, very close attention, both aurally to your sound and physically to your body, as well as to your mind. So once you've broken apart a piece and you're starting a chunk, you need to know how to practice that specific chunk. There are a couple of overall methods we'll use, and I'll introduce each one in detail when it shows up for the first time, or if you're jumping around, I'll refer back to the piece in which it's first discussed and implemented, so you can refer to that before you continue onward. For now, though, I want you to get the gist of this beforehand. The first thing we'll talk about are practice patterns. These are utterly indispensable. Practice patterns are amazing. There are a variety of practice patterns that we'll be employing at different times, but most of them involve totally ignoring or manipulating the written rhythms, meaning we would no longer care about the rhythms as written. We're not counting, they're not 8th notes and 16th notes, no, okay? We are instead hyper-focused on notes and articulations, forcing ourselves to pay very close attention to each transition and to ensure that notes and articulations are consistently accurate. This not only helps you learn more effectively, but it actually enables you to start working with the rhythm with a metronome more quickly than you would be able to do otherwise if you had skipped the practice session with practice patterns and just jumped straight to metronomes. Okay? So practice patterns are invaluable. Your time is limited and precious. If you wish to learn literature quickly and accurately, practice patterns will become your new best friend and the start of learning many tricky sections of music as a flutist. All those infinite runs that we play, practice patterns are the answer. I will demonstrate the appropriate patterns in the video with each work. Again, remember, start with number 34, that scale in thirds, to get a really good handle on the most commonly used patterns and the order in which I would recommend employing them. But if you master the routine of practice patterns followed immediately by metronome work, you will have created for yourself a routine of effective, efficient practice that can be applied to any music, not just this audition lit, anything. Like everything else in practice, pattern work is not a once and done sort of thing. You will need to repeat pattern work multiple times over many sessions for areas that are especially difficult. But don't give up. Keep working with your patterns, work with a metronome, have a plan, and you will see results and will learn more quickly and more accurately than the old play it over and over mindlessly until it magically, hopefully, somehow improves and is ready sort of method. No more of that. Get our mind in the game and have a plan. All right, so after practice patterns, then we need to talk about metronome work. And I know, here we go again with a very common suggestion for better practice that I'm sure you've heard a bajillion times, but I am here to tell you that good metronome work will do wonders for your ability to learn literature accurately and more quickly, including drastically improving your sight reading ability. And I mean, sight reading is essentially step one in learning a new piece, right? So we want to be good sight readers. Even if you feel like you already keep a pretty steady tempo by yourself, you should be working with a metronome to further solidify your own internal sense of beat and to define and ensure accurate rhythms in your practicing. We will follow pattern practice with a metronome every time. Starting slowly enough that it's easy, we will work a chunk with a metronome to ensure rhythmic accuracy and a steady tempo. After all, rhythm doesn't really mean much of anything, to be honest, if our tempo is all over the place. Accurate rhythms only exist within the bounds of a steady tempo. Also, metronomes allow you to set subdivisions, which we will absolutely be taking advantage of, and hearing or counting those subdivisions in your mind are what keep your tempo truly steady and thus your rhythms correct when you pull away from the metronome, which is also critical. Don't worry, I will never be the one that advocates for only working with a metronome forever and always. Okay, we will be bouncing back and forth using a metronome and then practicing without it After all, you don't get to perform with a metronome, but you need its steadying ability at the beginning. We'll bounce back and forth. A metronome not only aids in correct rhythms and helps you internalize a steady beat, but it also provides a fabulous means of tracking progress. Since we will start pieces well below your endgame tempo, tracking how fast you can play it accurately, session to session, provides a nice means of measurement and visual progress for you on your page. Once you're ready to play a chunk with a metronome, you'll gradually increase the tempo every correct rep or two. And by gradually, I mean like 2, maybe 3 clicks at a time. And sometimes that could even mean just 1 beat per minute, 1 click if a section is particularly difficult or if you're edging close to extremely fast temping. Now, while you're increasing your speed, you will also be thinking about other goals from the foundations, basics, and beyond, which we will get into in a minute. We always practice with a plan, and we never rep for speed alone. We always work for more than just tempo gains. Now, of course, we don't want to be utterly dependent on the metronome. So after several reps, that could be 4, 5, 3, it kind of depends on where you're at in the process, how comfortable you are with the piece already. Then do a few reps away from the metronome, paying close attention to tempo, rhythm, and keeping the counting and subdivision in your mind while you play instead of having it being clicked out for you by the metronome. Once you finish working on a section for the day, whether because you've made significant progress, because you're feeling frustrated and need to step away, or because you feel like you've hit your tempo ceiling for the moment, you'll stop and lightly, with a pencil so that it can be erased, write in the tempo marking for that section, indicating the last tempo at which you played that chunk accurately and comfortably. This way, in your next practice session, whether that's tomorrow, a couple days from now, or later that night, you will know where you ended previously and you can pick up from there instead of wasting time guessing at tempo, playing kind of randomly, or starting slower than you really need to. I do, however, encourage you to always start a few clicks below whatever your written tempo was when you return the next day or the next session, just to give yourself a few reps for comfort and to kind of get you back into the groove before you hit that previous top tempo. And of course, as you likely know, if you need or want to increase the tempo of a piece, you're much better off playing that section or work more often and for smaller tempo gains, rather than in some epic grand practice session where you attempt to speed a section up 50 clicks in half an hour, which most of the time is really more of a recipe for frustration and disaster. Cramming for auditions or performance, not the way I recommend approaching your music. That's usually a setup for lots of difficulty along the way and day of auditions. Keeping track of your tempo in each section will also help you when you go to combine your chunks, as you may notice that one chunk is far easier to play and thus comfortable much more quickly, which should indicate to you that you should probably spend more time on the slower or more difficult section, or start combining at that slower tempo, or, both. If we don't pay close attention to that sort of thing, it can lead to performing a piece with varying tempi, where we play the easy part quickly and then we kind of let ourselves off the hook and slow down a little bit for the harder stuff, even if unintentionally. So this is something that I hear literally every time I judge, whether it's for all districts, for school district chair tests, for solo ensemble festivals, for scholarship competitions, it doesn't matter. This happens all the time, and it's when I can tell that a student did not take the time and effort to step back and work with a metronome in large chunks. And to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, so let's just take a scale for the moment. I'm going to kind of play with what I hear sometimes when I know someone hasn't broken it down with a metronome. And I can hear that pause as they get up there thinking, these are not comfortable under my fingers, and so they change the actual tempo. It's even more dramatic when you're working in pieces and it's a little bit more jarring, but even in scales, that is not a good thing. You want to make sure the scale is in time. We want consistent, even tempi across the board. So here's another example of errors in it that makes it even worse. Same kind of thing. You're just highlighting where the struggles are by slowing down. We do not want that. So we really need to make sure that it is even across the board. That's why we step back and work with a metronome. And this can happen in the common chord, in the scale in thirds, in any of your etudes. I regularly hear this, so it is so critical to make sure that you are working large chunks with metronome. Long story short, befriend your metronome. It's okay if it's kind of a frenemy relationship at first, but befriend it. But don't become dependent on it either. Count in your head too. Don't let the metronome do all of your thinking for you. Metronomes should always be a tool, never a crutch. All right, so practicing with a plan, always. Whether you're practicing in patterns with or without a metronome as a big piece run through, it doesn't matter. You always have a plan or goal in mind. Know what you're working towards specifically in order to achieve it. It is awfully difficult to improve if we don't really know exactly what we're trying to do better. In order to always rep with a plan, we're going to go over 3 categories of concepts that will help you to always keep a goal in mind. First off are the basics: notes, rhythms and steady tempo, because those two are intertwined, and basic articulations. And I just mean tongue versus slur, not things like staccato, marcato, accent, etc. Okay, basic articulations. These 3 are the core of what we think about when we first start learning new repertoire. And these are the concepts that most students think about when we discuss whether a section was right or not. This is your baseline. These are the first details to conquer when you approach a new section, remembering, of course, to go slowly enough that it's easy to play with great accuracy. In most pattern work, which is how we'll start a lot of this, we will actually be abandoning the rhythms, and thus the steady tempo, altogether in order to entirely focus on the other 2 elements of the basics, notes and articulations. Once you begin to work with a metronome, though, you'll add that correct rhythmic structure and steady tempo back in while working to retain correct notes and articulations as you go. The reason I referred to rhythm and steady tempo as that unit is because, as you recall, rhythm does not really mean much if our tempo is inconsistent. Accurate rhythms exist within the bounds of a steady tempo. Of course, tempo changes and transitions in some of your other pieces, things like ritardandos, rubato, accelerandos, different movements with different tempi. All of that is a different sort of mentality, and we will discuss that in the Beyond section. But at the basics level, I want you to think of steady tempo and correct rhythms as utterly connected. Next up is your foundation. And you may be wondering why we covered basics before we covered the foundation level, and that's a fair question. But in my mind, the basics are the concepts that most of us think of as getting a section right. Notes, rhythms, articulations, basic level. Whereas I consider the foundation to be all of the things that you are practicing all the time, whether your mind is really focused on them or not. These foundational concepts are the ones that you are constantly ingraining in yourself every time you play, every time you pick up your flute. And it's what you default to in times of pressure or stress, like auditions and performances, for example. You are always practicing multiple concepts, even if your focus is on one specific aspect. If your focus is primarily here, you're still teaching yourself what you want your default to be, always building a foundation. I consider this foundation to be concepts like posture, hand position, flute angle, tone, which I realize is a massive category that has a whole bunch of other subcategories that we are not going to get into right now. Other elements of sound production, intonation, finger technique, air releases, proper breathing. These are all things that dramatically impact your overall performance, and they're all things you are constantly practicing, whether you're really paying much attention to them or not. Which is why once you've got those basics down and under your fingers in a new section, and you're ready to either start increasing your tempo in patterns or repping increasing tempo with a metronome, you really want to start bringing to the fore of your mind, to the mental foreground, these foundational concepts. Spend a few reps considering your posture. Ask yourself, is my back straight? Are my knees slightly bent? Am I standing tall? Are my hips in the correct place? All of that. Spend some reps carefully considering your tone and what you could be doing to improve it. Think about getting a good deep breath every time and engaging the abdominal wall to achieve support for your sound. Or think about opening up more for increased resonance in your sound. There will always, and I mean always, to this day, there's always some foundational element to consider and to improve upon in practice. That's the awesome and daunting part of musicianship, is there's always something to do better. And we want that foundation to be strong, and we want you to default to good habits under pressure. So we want to build a strong foundation as you gain control of the basics. Finally, we have the beyond level concepts. These are elements of improved musicality, the sort of next level concepts that you'll want to start implementing to take your music and your performances sort of up a notch. These are ideas like dynamics, style, intentional articulations, which is what I refer to for things like staccato, accent, marcato, those sorts of articulations. This could also include vibrato, phrasing, tempo shifts, the rubato, accelerando, allegando, returns to tempo, all of that, ornamentations, and so on. As you get better at mentally engaged practice, practicing with a plan for every rep, you'll find it easier over time, not right away, but over time, to start layering these beyond concepts earlier in your practice. For example, you might find when you're returning to some pattern work on a very difficult section that you've already run with patterns and with a met several times, but you still need to go back to it. At this point, you may also be able to consider something like the dynamic changes in play while you're repping in patterns, or perhaps you could do a better job playing light, lifted, bright staccatos with good space around them, as opposed to simply tonguing the notes while you do your pattern work. For each piece, the basics and foundation will look about the same, as will some of the beyond, but I will note specific beyond and etude-specific concepts to which you should pay extra close attention for each given etude, depending on what is most relevant or what your judges are most likely to be listening for and expecting. You can find these categories and the concepts within each on your practice plan PDF so that you will have a handy reference guide to help you stay on track and rep with a plan every single time. Even if you're not sure how exactly to improve your playing in a section, you can just pick one of these ideas and start asking yourself questions. Ask yourself how you can incorporate that concept into your playing.